Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Ed Parcaut of Helping the Brave, and let's bring in our guest today, Sean Adelman. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. All right, so there's only one question I asked on the show that's the same. What service and why did you pick that service?
I chose the Air Force. My dad and my brother were Army, and I couldn't do what my dad did, but I wanted to serve. And, I was applying to med school, and, I didn't know how I was going to pay for things. So it was just a natural course for me. I had friends in the Air Force, and I'd always wanted to be a pilot. So even though I couldn't be a pilot, it seemed like a cool idea at the time. And it turned out to be a good decision for me.
Is that because your eyesight could be a pilot?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, last I think, do they allow the surgery now, and then you can be pilots or not?
Yeah, actually, that changed when I was active duty in the Air Force because I took care of a lot of pilots. My brother's actually a helicopter pilot, his eyes changed during his career. So, and that's partly why he went in the Army is, he wanted to fly helicopters. He wanted to fly fixed wing, but now he's been doing it forever, and he's enjoyed it. But to your point, though, that actually was a policy that changed during my time in the Air Force. Before that, it was not an issue.
Yes, I had mine done in, a long time ago, 98, the first time. And then now it's like I'm blind again. I was 200 by something back then. I was really blind.
Oh,
now it's just old age.
Yeah, well, I'm at that state like my nearsightedness is only beneficial. So half the time I go through, that's why I have the dents on my forehead so I can actually see in front of me.
Yeah, people don't. Yeah, it's just a little different. And so I wear glasses even though I don't have to wear them all the time. I don't want, which kids don't understand today, I don't want the lines. By squinting and all the stuff you do to, and my wife will be somewhere and she can't see us. It's like, put your damn glasses on, woman. Stop being, yeah. We were in Vegas and her friends waving at her and she couldn't even see her. I'm like, anyway. All right, Sean, you're Air Force, and then so you went to medical school.
Yeah. And
then you were in the Air Force. How long were you in the Air Force?
So I was Air Force. I was active duty almost 13 years. I joined, I applied for a scholarship when I was in undergrad. And then once I was undergrad, I had to go through officer training, and they paid for my med school. And I served reserve time throughout med school. And then I was deferred for a civilian residency back in the 90s, then served active duty 98 to 2002. And it was a challenging time. It's always challenging, but I was in the Middle East 2 weeks after 9/11, and that's something we can talk about, but that's something that's imprinted in your brain that you'll never forget. But I've got some great stories of it. I was a team doctor for the special ops. So Eglin Air Force Base is where I was stationed. So I took care of a lot of the PJs.
This is about you. So what do you want to talk about? This is the show about you, your service and what you did out, you transitioning and what you're doing now. So what do you want to talk about? You were talking about the teams and you want to keep going with that. Because you were talking about if you want to get into it. What people understand, I want to make everybody understand, just because you weren't in during combat doesn't mean you can't have things that happen to you, because there's a lot of stuff. I was a corpsman at Camp Pendleton, and I saw more stuff than I ever saw because we pulled duty as ambulance. And then I was also in physical therapy, which dealt with burn patients and other stuff like that. So we dealt with a lot of stuff, which I'm not saying in combat you don't. I'm just saying for people who are listening who was not in combat, you're okay to have issues and get those issues taken care of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We all have, I think that's the one lesson I've learned is that we all have our own challenges and we can't make assumptions based on what we think people might be going through at that time. And that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned from my family, honestly, is my perspective on what's important has changed dramatically from when I was young before I did all this stuff. Taking those moments and appreciating what you have in front of you, sounds easy, but it can be more challenging than most of us thought. And all of us have a different journey. My journey started with the military because of my family, and the military, afforded me the luxury of going to med school and afforded me experiences that I would never had in the civilian sector. But getting out of the military left me in a vacuum. Even though I was a physician and I had a family and a wonderful life, You get used to that support. When you go into a different space in the military, you have this automatic band of people that sort of are used to the movement and used to being around. And when you're in the civilian world, you go into a situation where people don't have that, and it feels very artificial and very weird. And even if you're successful, getting used to that can be challenging, and how you get into life again, even if you have a professional degree or professional career, or whether you served in times of war or not. It is a very hard transition. I suppose if I had not been part of a military family and hadn't grown up with that, it wouldn't have been as stark for me. But getting out of the military was really one of the hardest decisions I ever made, and we've done well with that. But to your point, is we all have our challenges, and for me, it was losing part of who I had always identified myself as. Even though I felt like I had to do that for my family, it definitely left a vacuum for me.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that you lose that purpose or that identity that you had. But let's back up a little. So your dad was in the Air Force. Was he in for? Did he retire Air Force or?
Yeah, well, my dad was Army. I apologize.
Army. I'm sorry. You're Air Force, Army. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, my dad was a prior enlisted. He joined the military right out of high school and went back and got his degree during that period of time. He was an air defense artillery guy who served in Korea and Vietnam. And, he was gone overseas a lot of my growing up, but, he was a squadron not squadron commander. He was a battery commander. And so we always had troops over at house. And that was sort of how we identified our lives during those formative years for me. My brother went to West Point and is a helicopter pilot. He's been in the Middle East more times than I can count, flying Chinooks and Hueys. And actually the Hueys have been phased out. And now he flies helicopters for hospitals now when he's not doing his reserve stuff. So that was a formative part of our life. And that's why, it was a natural transition for me to want to be part of that.
So you were moving, I want to cut it off real quick because ask a question. Now he was in, so you transferred to different places all the time when you were younger.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we never lived anywhere longer than 3 or 4 years.
Right. So that was something you were used to. So when you got in the military, I assumed the same thing happened to you after med school and everything else.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what happened. And, the transitions we all go through life, college and career training and graduate school, moves. But in the military, it's manifest in different ways. And so when you grow up moving, you don't make those close relationships that other people around you. It was really foreign for me to be around people who grew up in the same town, who've lived there their whole life. And to me, that was like, how is this going to be? And it created a pressure when I got out of, well, this is where we're going to live. Like, we're not going to move again. This is where we're going to live. This is where we're going to build a family. We're going to build relationships. And so it brings a whole nother pressure to the family unit. And then if you do move, it feels like a different form of failure. So I've fallen back into the same grooves I did, when I was in the military, and building those relationships, and wanting my children to have the stability that I never felt I had growing up. And it's not that it's a bad thing. I want to be very clear. I'm very grateful for all I've had. But when you grow up in the military, you develop relationships differently. And when you move to a different base in the military, there's this influx of people who are used to moving around. So relationships happen quicker and they're more brief. And you may maintain those throughout your entire career, but it's a very different thing. Whereas when you land somewhere that it doesn't have a big military presence, it can be very off-putting, especially, we moved to Seattle, and the Seattle freeze is real. Like I'm very grateful for the neighbors I have now, but new people are not part of their equation, and which is a very, very different thing when you're used to that family, particularly for where I was working in the military, because as a team doc for these high stress occupations, you bonded really quickly, and your level of importance varied. And it's also kind of funny, as you can appreciate in the Air Force, the the pilots were the top of the food chain, regardless of your rank. And so, even when I outranked a pilot, it didn't matter jack. That was how things go. And so my ego was kept very well in check for a long time. And
I find that people in the medical field, officers, is a totally different group of people to begin with. Because I understand what you're saying. Because when I was in the Navy, and so you go down to Miramar and you have all those pilots. You don't even get around them because they're flying $1 million, back then $1 million jets. Now they're very much more expensive, and there's a lot they do, and they have to be a certain way they are because of that. But I worked with doctors and physical therapy at the hospital, and it was totally different people. I tell people when I was in from 85 through 90, and it was MASH.
Yeah,
was basically what it was for me. We all got along. It was not really no one cared about your rank. Nobody cared about this. Just do your job, do what you're supposed to do, take care of the patients. That's all we care about.
No, absolutely. And it was a bit of a dichotomy for me because I grew up, my dad was prior enlisted, and he retired at 20 as a major and went on to do stuff on the line. And, I was, halfway into my active duty tenure, I was already captain, and then I was a major and way earlier than my dad, and it just didn't commute. How am I making rank? Well, my dad was in 20, just the relationships. And the really, really funny thing was when I was in officer training, we had a bunch of, pre-law and chaplains and people sort of, marching around and doing their thing. And I was taking it way too seriously just because of, who I was. And it was because the year prior to when I enlisted, it was so bad that they actually made the physicians and the chaplains and the JAGs go through a real officer training for my year, just because they wanted somebody that could at least maintain some presence in the public. And it ended up being this really hilarious joke for a lot of us because nobody beyond us cared, but those anyway, I think you can appreciate how that would have looked in the outside world.
Yeah, and again, people make rank in different parts of each service differently. My son's in right now, and I think he's E6 now, and he's been in just over, I think he's going for 8 years, and he's transferred, and that's for me. And he was E5 within. He could have been 4 years, but then the reenlistment bonus was $40,000 for E4, and if he would have been an E5, it's $10,000. So he waited until he got his reenlistment bonus to go move up to the rank, and I'm like, that's smart. I would have never thought of that myself. Just Army makes rank as enlisted so fast in certain fields. Where in the Navy, with the field I was in, corpsmen, no, people never got out, and that was the problem. And so it's all different. Like when you're making rank as a doctor, it's a totally different thing because doctors change and other people change, and probably where your dad was, people didn't move, and so they can't only move up rank if somebody moves out.
Yeah, 100%.
Because there's only so many generals and so many this and so many that they can have at a certain time. Anyway, enough about that kind of stuff. So when you got out, so you decided to get out, and was it because it was the time for you to get out, or was it just, help me understand, because everybody has a different way of getting out. When I got out, I got my bachelor's, I was working on my master's, and I was like, okay, this is time for me to get out, because I cannot be in where I'm at, where you can tell me what to do just because you've been in one day more than me in the service and the higher rank. You know what I mean? I'm like, I can't be in this environment. That doesn't work for me. And that's why I got out.
No, I think that's a great question. And I think the challenge for me was that I really thought I was going to be in there for a career. And it was really, and when I was in the military, it was a different time. In the medical corps, we took care of dependents, we took care of retirees, we did a lot of different things for the community. The budgets were different. At the end of the year, if we were short, then the squadron would sort of ante up a little bit to make sure that we got what we needed to do to finish that. And during my tenure, that all changed quite a bit. And because of the financial challenges of the time, particularly in the wartime, that was no longer the case. And so the base budget could no longer compensate for the medical corps. And so we had to really file down, who we saw, and it changed the practice dramatically. And at the time, the Surgeon General of the Air Force was a surgeon. And he really felt that surgeons were only people who knew what they were doing. And so he had these for deployments, he had these surgical teams that would go out to deployments. Like for 9/11, it was a group of an anesthesiologist, general surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, a nurse, or an ER doctor. That was the forward surgical team, and that's what was deployed for every major deployment. And so prior to my tenure, prior to my first deployment, the times that you would get deployed as a surgeon were once every few years. And typically in the Air Force, it was for 3 months at a time, maybe 6 months at a time, as opposed to the Army, which had much longer deployments. I can't speak to the Navy because I didn't have that.
We just have less backs.
Better bases, I will say. Better uniforms and better bases, I will say that.
No, Air Force has better bases and better everything. The Air Force was smart. They go, you know what? We built all the stuff for the people, and we couldn't put in the airfields. Okay, here's some more money so you can put the actual airfields in. Where the Navy builds all the ships, and they said, we need more money for our people. Sorry, we don't have it.
Yeah, and so when I was getting into the time of my commitment, I had to choose, and because of the change in how force development had occurred, it became clear that we were going to get deployed for, at that time, 6 months out of every year. And we just had a new child. And, I had to make a choice. Am I going to get out and be there and support my family? Because I've been gone a lot during this period of time of deployment. Or am I going to stay active duty and say goodbye to my family for 6 months out of every year? And that was a really, really hard choice because I really loved what I did. But for our family at the time, that was really the only decision I felt that I could make and still maintain my family unit the way and then we had a child with special needs. And this is kind of how I got into this. I had a daughter with Down syndrome that, and where we were currently living at Eglin Air Force Base, the community, although the military community was wonderful, the educational community and the infrastructure for supporting her simply was not there. And so the challenge for me was, how do I merge these two things that I saw myself as, a dad, a surgeon, and a Air Force officer, and I had to choose, and that was. It took me a long time to recover from that because it was such a sentiment, to sign that I was resigning my commission. To me, it was like, how do I sign that? Like, that's just part of who I am. But there really wasn't, for me personally, a way to get around that, at least for me to sort of be able to look at my wife and my family and say, yes, I'm doing the right thing by you. And it still affects me, because this is hard. I don't talk about this a lot. My family is all military, and so on Memorial Day and Veterans Day, when you're in church and they ask for all the active duty people to stand up, I always struggle with that because I don't feel like I served the way I could have. I wasn't on the lines and I wasn't doing my thing, and I resigned my commission when I got out, which is I know is psychological babble, but the truth is it's still, to this day, hard for me to see myself as that person, because I do feel like I could have done more. And you can't turn back the clock. And I'm very grateful for my family, and we can talk about that for hours. But to this point it's still is something I haven't really gotten over. And, I got out in 2002. And it's still, are things that I think about.
You served. That's all you have to do. You served the country. That's all that was asked of you. You did it. I know you wanted to do, you feel the way you do, and I'm not trying to say that you don't have the right to feel that way, but what we as veterans, it's the fact that we raised our hand and said, we're going to serve for this country. I signed online. I don't know how officers do it, but we had to sign online saying, take our life for 4 years and then, and give it back to me after 2 years of inactive reserve or whatever. Mine was 4 and 4. So it was a total of 8. But it's what I mean is that we did that just because you actually went to combat too. So I don't know how much more you needed to do. You didn't do 20 years. That's okay. A lot of people who go in for 20 get out at 17, get out at 15 because things happen to them and certain things happen. You just have to be okay with the fact that you did say I was going to do this. You had something else that came in your life. I have a daughter with special needs. I understand that. And so you had something else that was brought on and you needed to take care of, and you did that by serving her.
Yeah.
So it's just how you look at things. And I understand. I don't know if you can tell me to shut up anytime you want. But I'm just thinking you need to look at the fact that what came in your life changed who you were, and you had to step up for that, just like you stepped up for the military. So
no,
that's what I hear and that's what I see. So I don't know if that helps you at all.
No, it does. And that's, when we talk about family and stuff, I think the thing that's really changed my perspective, and we can all say this, that there are days when you look in the mirror and you don't always like who you are. There's always that negative self-talk about you could do more, you could be different, and all those other things. And the one thing that I've learned from my daughter is she sees herself as this great person. She has little inspirational things that she puts stickies up all over her room, and then the positive self-talk, and that is her mantra, and that's what she puts out for the universe. And so every time I go down these paths of negativity and self-loathing, I think about her and how she would approach things, and it really is very helpful. When I was young, my thoughts of who I was going to be and how I was going to affect the universe were very different. I'm going to be the Surgeon General. I'm going to do great things for lots of people, and those are wonderful thoughts, and those are things that we should all value. But the things I've learned as I've gotten older, particularly from my children, particularly from my daughter with Down syndrome, is that those little moments, those little interactions. When every patient that I see, I affect their life in a positive way. I have to hold on to those individual moments because those build over time. Every interaction I have throughout the day, I want that to be a positive interaction. I want that person that I'm meeting to. When I'm in the OR, I treat the nurses the same way, the people who clean the floors the same way. They're all equally important in my eyes, and they all deserve the respect. And if I can make their day that much better, then the world is better for it. I know that sounds kind of corny, but no, I totally agree with that. I tell my kids, make it better than you found it, where you're at. If you find trash, throw it away. If you're doing this, treat everybody the same. The one thing about having kids with special needs, all you want for them is to have a happy life. Yeah. And that's all that they do is they're happy. That's it. Because and the problem is we go, why can't we just be like that? Oh, yeah.
God, wouldn't life be better if that's all we had to worry about was where my food was and being happy?
Oh, dude, you hit that. You hit it on the head. Finding joy, finding that happiness, finding what makes things special is an elusive target. And often you don't appreciate that it's an internal thing. You can't buy the new car. You can't have the new job. Those things aren't going to make you happy. Money and stuff can sort of give you things, but they sure can't make you happy. And having somebody like that in your life, it makes you more focused on what does actually make you happy. And she has bad days. We all have bad days, but by God, she's in an apartment. She's got a job. She's living independently, and she's living her best life. And those are things that we can all take to hold. And those are, for me personally, those are important lessons as we talked about, me getting out and seeing myself in a different way and not necessarily being the person I thought I was going to be at that stage of my life, and second guessing all those things that happen when you go into this vacuum. And having somebody who that stuff didn't matter to, that she saw joy and things in a very different way, just once again, it changes perspective, and it allows me to sort of focus more on those around me in a more positive way. because I see those little things, and they become more tangible. And as we get older, we see how more important those things are. You and I talking to our kids and stuff. It's one thing to have that mantra of, oh, Dad said that, and you should pick up trash and do all the things you just said. But as you get older and you see those interactions grow over time, and particularly in my job, those people that I've affected over years. I had one young kid who he wanted to get to med school. He was having a hell of a time getting, the grades and all that. He was really smart, but he just had trouble taking tests. And so I mentored him for a few years. And then I said, have you ever applied to, USHIS, the Uniform Medical School? You'd be great. You have all the right things, and this would be a formative thing for you, because the traditional routes hadn't worked for him. And he got in, and now he's, finishing his residency and sending me pictures of his family and all those things. And, he's going to be a great doctor. And all those paying it forward things, as we get older, we see those things come to fruition. That little amount of time that I spent with him turned into him now being an anesthesiologist in the military with a family in a very different space in his life, just because we had those discussions, those open discussions that nobody really had the guts to have with him before. And once again, as we get older, we see those little things that have changed the scope of different people's lives in ways that make it more meaningful. When you're young, you can hear what we say, but you don't see those things. And what I at least feel is that I now have the more presence of mind. And life is growth. And you have to learn every day different things. And sometimes it's the simplest thing from the person in the room that you don't even expect to learn something from. And if you're not open to those things, then you will not succeed.
All right, Sean, so what's next for you? So are you still practicing as a...
Yeah. So I'm an orthopedic trauma surgeon here in the Seattle area. I'm still working hard.
So trauma, you only take care of major problems. You don't do knee implant replacement.
Yeah, so that's a great point. I've always been a trauma surgeon, but to your point is, up until a few years ago, I did do a lot of elective things, and my knee hurts, my shoulder hurts, those kinds of things. But I elected to sort of move into just the trauma role, because I felt like that was, for me personally, that was the cleanest path to doing good. The people getting into the hospital need me by default. And I don't mean that to sound harsh, because we all have elective issues that need to be changed. But for me, it was much more rewarding. It was much cleaner. And so I've been doing trauma surgery for a while now. I've got a great team. I'm very thankful. And it's also given me a little space. The one thing that I've learned about myself is exercise, and that creative part of my brain is very important as well. Just like having this podcast so you can create things and do things. It's, we can talk about the technical aspects of things, but having the creative aspects of things. And so my job as a trauma surgeon gives me time off to sort of explore those things. And it gives me the time off to be on podcasts, like you and I are able to talk about things that are important. And that was really the space I needed. So I have a very dichotomous life. I have my trauma surgeon life, and then and when I'm not on, I'm not on. So I can do things like this and talk about the military, talk about my kids, write more books, do those things that...
What books? Did you write books?
Yeah. So I've written 5 books. The earliest ones are early readers, and the reason I started doing that was because I had a daughter with Down syndrome, and I didn't think the world gave her the chance that she deserved, and I wanted people to have she likes to call herself the ambassador of possibilities, and so the whole idea is storytelling, so that people can emulate and see themselves in a story, so that it was educational but not like a textbook. Here's the answer, and that was the challenge for me. As a surgeon, you want to know the bad stuff that happens, the things that can go wrong, but you don't learn the social, the empathy, the growth parts of having a family. And so I wanted to tell that story. So, the guy who was a researcher who wrote technical stuff decided he was going to write children's books. And that was one of the scary moments of my life, to actually put that out there for the universe, thinking, am I going to be any good at this? Is this okay? And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I'm trying, and I just have to be okay with that. So, and what's funny is now it's become just part of who I am. So I'm this surgeon dad, but also I write books, and it's kind of cool.
I wrote my first book, Financial Freedom, a couple of years ago. It came out, same thing. It was all about how to buy a home and everything else, because all the other books didn't talk the way how I do things. And so I put it out there. Same thing, though. You don't know how it's going to come across and how people are going to think about it and that kind of stuff. And so then I have like 4 more ready to go that I got to get out. You know how it is. It's you start writing.
Awesome.
And yeah.
Yeah.
Because I did Financial Freedom, building personal wealth for home ownership for everybody. But then I'm like, I didn't even hit veterans, and I need to do it just for veterans. So I did. So I rewrote that book for veterans, and that one I have ready. And then I did one for veterans for trust and probate. And then I did dividing assets, which is basically when you're going through a divorce, what you should do with the house and your real estate. Because I had a lady, I was on a podcast, and it just happened to be a divorce podcast. And they were like, we'd like to send your book out. But I'm like, this is not really geared towards what you're going through. It's a totally different world when you're going through a divorce.
No, those are wonderful. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I love the creative process. I love sitting down and writing stories and the thought process. It's the editing and the marketing and the...
Yeah, I like all that. The other part is all right. So I don't know about you, but I've been using ChatGPT and Claude forever. But so when I go to the store and I go to this one supermarket and there's certain meat, and so I'll take a picture of it and throw it in there and say, what can I use this for? Because I'm cheap. All right. So I always wait till the meat's like 1 day or 2 days, and I had flag, and it helped me make all these recipes that were amazing. And so I'm like, I need to make a cookbook. And so I dropped that into Claude and made it and had it put it all together for me, all my recipes I did and everything else. And now I got going to have a cookbook coming out.
That's barbecuing. A fantastic story. Cooking by Claude.
Well, no, it's just you ask it a picture. Like I was actually ChatGPT at first, and I would take a picture of it and say, "What can I make with this?" Because I wanted to start cooking around here and taking better care of myself and everything else. My wife cooked all the time and always complained about it. I'm like, and I cook outside, barbecuing, smoking, everything else already. But what more can I do? And the way I made this book is, whatever that you're going to eat, because I make salmon that's amazing, moist, everything, where most people make salmon, it's so horrible, it's dry. If I'm going to cook something, it's coming out perfect. And so I have a few different recipes, but I'm like, what sides? That was the most important thing, because if you're cooking and you need the side, because if you're making the dinner, you got to have sides. When I first met my wife in 2002, she came over I was making steaks, and I'm like, here's your steak. What else? I'm like, I don't need anything else. I already had a salad. So now I do more sides and everything else. And in this book, it also gives you that. Then it also gives you like salad ideas, and also gives you like, non-alcoholic and alcoholic ideas to go with the meal. So that it's really set up for guys who are stupid like me when it comes to making meals. So
that's fantastic.
It's not called, book for, barbecuing for dummies. Maybe I should make that, because that's what, I don't know if you remember back in the 90s, 2000. Yeah.
Yeah. We can relate to those things for sure.
Yeah. So that's but it's funny how it was just, I kept asking it so much, and then I didn't realize how much I had in there because I was doing so much. Because fish, I hate fish is what it was. And then I've now made it to where I like all that stuff because I make it the way I like it.
No, that's fantastic. And it's using a tool in a novel way that allowed you to create something, which is just, that's organic. That's super cool. And that's
my first book, I used a ghostwriter. Right. They didn't write my book for me. They just talked to me and got it out of me. Because there's people who talk real well, and there's people who write. And usually those two don't go together. And right. I mean, that's how I don't know. Are you a good speaker and a good writer? Are you a better writer than speaker?
I'm good at meandering and that. The writing is challenging. I'm too much of a big picture person. And I get lost, as a surgeon, everything I do is very succinct. It's like, get to it, and so I want to tell the entire 300-page book in a paragraph. And that doesn't really work.
That's how, yeah, but you're also a veteran, what makes it worse. That's me. I'm total direct. That's why being in the mortgage industry, it's perfect, because that's what you have to be. You have to be very direct. And there's some people who don't like that. That's okay. That's why I work with veterans. 80% of the people I work with is veterans. The other 5% is business owners, and the other 5% is reverse mortgages. It's all about dignity and being direct. So.
No, absolutely. I can't bring myself to take a chapter to describe a room. I just like.
Well, it's like, so I was on a walk, because I do that a lot, because that's an easy way to lose weight on top of everything else. And I don't know if you know this, but if you have Claude or any of them, you can push a button and you can talk to it, and they'll talk back to you and back and forth. And I went through some stuff on there. And what did you just say? Because now I lost my train of thought. What you were doing about the chapter. Yeah. So so it recommended, I was trying to find a couple of things on Audible to listen to, and it gave me a book and it goes, well, this is, I know you, this is, and it gave me 3 different ideas. So I listened to it, and then I went back to it and said, I was listening to the book, but it was taking forever to tell me what I want to know. And it's like, oh yeah, it's more of a philosophy and this and that. I don't want that. I want to be told what I want to do, how to organize this and how to do that now. I don't want to sit around about it. Don't give me books that take forever to explain things.
No,
so I understand what you're saying. Totally get it.
No, and it's fun that you brought up Claude, because that's really how I kind of got back into this. After the pandemic and jobs and life, I got out of that creative side of me, and it was really struggling to sort of get back into things. As you know, in the publishing world, it's just impossible to sort of get noticed. And I'm not really good at social media and getting those numbers up underneath me. But I was my son, who's a mechanical engineer, was helping me, with creating some agents with Claude. And I just started talking to Claude about, oh, here's my books and here's my life, and what should I do, and these agents. And Claude said, well, maybe you should start looking at podcasts and different ways to organize your social media and telling your story. And it was fantastic, because I love my family, I love my life, and if I can impart that stuff on other people so they can see themselves in those stories, to me, that's a win. And so being able to have this conversation with you today is a win. No matter what happens, my day is better now. It just is. The funny thing is that all came because I had this conversation. I had some challenge, and we can talk about the children thing. I had some challenging things at work. As a surgeon, I see some really rough things sometimes. And, I've seen some families make some decisions that were based on inaccurate knowledge. And I want to make sure that people understand the other aspects of life that you may not get from your physicians and from other people. And that's part of why I like to talk to people like you, is because I want people to hear those messages. I want them to hear, what happiness looks like for different people, what success means on different people. Success is something different than you and I thought was success when we were young. And now we can actually impart some of those things so that people can build lives. And to your point, and to this podcast point, is, when you have huge life changes, particularly getting out of the military, when a part of you just gets removed, and you still have the trauma of some of the things that you may or may not have seen, and your life looks very differently, being able to sort of hone in on all those things that are important and get some focus back is really hard. And so, focusing on some of the things that you may not have thought were important earlier on, become more important as you go through these changes.
I totally agree. Because then what people don't understand, life happens while you're planning it. And people like, I'm going to plan this and this, because I had so many people like, I got an 800 FICO score. Well, what would happen if you lost that? Would you still be okay? Because most people wouldn't be. They'd be freaking out. I had a lady who I was doing a refinance for, canceled one of her credit cards and dropped her FICO score 80 points. And and I go, yeah, you never cancel them because the history is the most important thing. But what I'm getting at is things happen. You work around it. You'll move on. Things are going to, these are all, it's that old show where the guy was talking about, it was Parenthood. Remember, and he's talking about the roller coaster, and he starts shaking and he going down. That's basically what life is, ups and downs. And it's how you get through those that it tells you who you really are.
Right.
And shows people. Who is the person when nobody's around and watching them? Who is that person?
Who is that? Yeah, exactly.
What I mean is, it's people. People are always good when they're being watched, but when they're not being watched, they're not always good. So.
Right. And I think that's exactly, and that's that's why we sort of call our stuff Raise Expectations, is because and this has been shown is the expectations we have for those, not just our loved ones, but those around us, in the military and the civilian sector and your family. If you have lower expectations, they will achieve less. If you don't expect them to do stuff, you will not. It's those little micro interactions, and not just promotions or anything like that. If you expect more of people, they are much more likely to achieve. I expect a lot of this podcast. I expect people to hear our conversation and find some owning in that, and that in and of itself is going to affect the outcome of that podcast. And so when you're interacting with your kids, I always tell people, the job of the parent is not to put bars up. The job of the parent is to provide a soft landing. Your kids are going to do what they're going to do, and your job is to expose them to things so that they can achieve what they're going to achieve. You can't have any preconceived notions about what your kids may or may not be able to do, regardless if they have a diagnosis. I have a lot of families who think, because they have a diagnosis, they're limited. Most of the challenges I see in life are not people who have a diagnosis. You never know. You don't know what you don't know. And all you can do is do your best every day. And if you consistently lower the expectations of those around you, if you expect less of those who work for you, who work with you, or your family, then they will not achieve what they're capable of achieving. And that is not your role in life. Your role in life is to support people. And some people may fall. In the disability community, we call it the dignity of failure. If you're not allowed to fail, you will never succeed. And so you have to be given the opportunity to fail. That's how you get better. That's how you progress in life. In the military, that's training. You train. You screw it up 8 million times until you get it right so that you can do it correctly. And those are mantras that we tend to sort of forget about when you're sort of going through life. I'm not going to be perfect at something the first time I do it. And I'm certainly not going to have an expectation of my family that I wouldn't have for myself. And that was one thing we always did for our kids is, we didn't expect any less of our quote special needs child because we didn't know what she was going to be capable of. And when she was born, the average life expectancy of somebody with Down syndrome was in their 30s, and many people lived in institutions and supported. And the thought of having an independent life was nowhere in that. And unless you have an open mind and an open heart, you will never allow those around you to achieve what they're capable of. I know that's a big mantra, but I think it's an important thing to sort of keep in perspective.
All right. Sean, what I should have asked you today that I didn't ask you? Or should have I?
Oh, I think the main thing is you asked me at the start of it. I just didn't give you a very good answer. I think my mantra about raise expectations is how I identify myself, and part of my story is explaining why I think that's important. And I think you and I having this conversation is part of that big picture. Humans tend to be tribal. And we tend to stay with the people we think like and look like and act like. And part of the mantra of you and I having this conversation is knowing that people are different and people go through different stuff, and recognizing that is really important. So I think the question you didn't ask me was because I didn't give you a good answer.
No, I don't know about that. All right. So people who just keeps hearing raise expectations, that's your website?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Next time when you come on a podcast, put it underneath your name.
Oh, okay. That would make sense.
See how I have edparcaut.com over there?
Yes.
That way they know that, hey, it's there. And when people are watching this, because we'll cut it up and we'll put it as shorts and everything else, it's right there all the time and they don't have to look for it. But we'll put it in the notes below. Okay. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the Helping the Brave today. I really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, wonderful voice. Thank you very much. It's been great.
Anywhere, so besides raisingexpectations.com, is there... or raiseexpectations.com. Sorry, I said it wrong.
Yeah,
is there anywhere else that you want people to connect with you?
There's a resource page on raiseexpectations.com, and people can email us through the website. All of our social media stuff is on that website as well as the books. And the one thing I tell everybody is on the resource page, there's lots of volunteer stuff. And the reason for that is because you don't know until you don't know. And actually engaging with people you've never met before is an important part of growth. And so, going to a track meet or a basketball game or something that is meaningful to you, to meet people that are different than you, is an important part of understanding others.
Now, are you ever going to do anything outside of Washington? Because the whole thing's set up on Washington, right? The state of Washington, that's where you're at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you should do is put it out there that you're looking for other people in other states to have that, to help you, and then you guys connect. That's what I've been doing with Helping the Brave, with our trying to help people with their disability. I'm trying to get all the information for every state so we can have one place to put it in to get your disability and everything else.
No, you're 100% correct. I think that's the best way to do it, and I appreciate everything you said.
Well, like I said, if you don't like it, just tell me to shut up. All right, Sean.
I'll wait till we log off to say that.
All right, Sean. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Take care.
All right.